Star Wars Jedi Knight Jedi Academy. What a mouthful. If you've never played this or Jedi Outcast before, you are seriously missing out. I know that these games are very old, and there's a lot of extra steps that you have to take to get it to run on modern systems, but these were released around the time that we were getting banger Star Wars games, like the original Battlefront or Star Wars Episode 1. Jedi Academy ended up having its own story separate from the movies, which continued the lore of Luke training young Jedi. So it doesn't rely on Darth Vader jump scares and ends up being a pretty interesting story, albeit very old and weird. Personally, I think Jedi Academy and Jedi Outcast are far better than the more recent Jedi Survivor games. For starters, these games have dismemberment, which is kind of a staple hold of a Jedi lightsaber, but I guess it's just too gory for modern games. And the crazy thing is that you don't even have to use the lightsaber. You can beat this entire game just using the various blasters. The game itself is mission-based, allowing you to select 4 or 5 missions at a time to tackle in any order that you want, and as you complete them, you'll level up, in a sense. You'll basically have the chance to pick and choose a couple different Force abilities and whether you want to level them up or just choose a new ability on the next level. For me, I just rush the dark powers like Force Grip and Force Lightning. The game doesn't try to lock these dark Force abilities out of your playstyle for the sake of lore. It just lets you go ham and use whatever the hell you want. But then your core abilities like blocking or saber throw, for example, will just passively level up as you get further and further in the campaign. Basically, every time you beat those 4 to 5 missions, you'll be locked into a story mission. And upon completing that story mission, before you can tackle the next 5 missions, you'll usually get to pick either a lightsaber stance or a different lightsaber weapon. See, in the original game, you could end up using a singular lightsaber with 3 different stances: strong, medium, and fast. These had their advantages and disadvantages. Usually you would end up swapping between them mid-fight so that you could get the advantage over your opponent. But for today's video review, we're actually talking about the VR version. The VR version doesn't have any different stances near as I can tell, because there's not really any reason to. See, in the original game, the different stances would not only give you various power levels with your swings, your attack animations would also be completely different. But in VR, you can kind of just swing however you want, so there's not really a need for stances anymore. Maybe there are different stances in the VR version, but I never swapped to them because I didn't know how. More importantly, in the latter half of the campaign, you'll get to choose whether or not you use dual sabers or a saber staff. The staff was my go-to on mouse and keyboard, especially when it came to PvP. But in VR, I had to go for the dual sabers. As for my recommendation, honestly, I would recommend this game even without VR. If you've never played through it before, I know that it can feel a little bit jarring. Like, the level design is very linear. There's some parts that are just outright confusing where you don't know what you're supposed to do. And the final few levels have so many enemies, you're just gonna start speed running past them. But overall, this game is still stupendous, and I would love to have a full remaster or remake. The base game of Jedi Academy has a lot of amazing mods, and the reason why it's got such a huge following behind it is because the PvP is a lot more in depth than you would think. But if, like me, you've played through the original game back in the day and you have no desire to come back to it, if you have a quest, it is worth playing through. On its own merits, this is the best Star Wars VR game I've ever played. I have played the official Star Wars VR games on the Quest, and honestly, they're kind of walking simulators. There's a difference between a game that's designed for VR from the ground up and a game like this that's already fantastic, that's ported into VR very well. It is astonishing to me that some modders could end up coming up with a VR port of this game for absolutely free, and a good port at that. Like, this is top tier.